I think that right now Putin is contemplating what is a Russian massive intelligence failure when it comes to the attack on Ukraine. Now, that's not to say that this operation the Russians have undertaken will not ultimately be successful. However, there have been a huge amount of intelligence errors made. First of all, I think Putin has fallen into the spell that a lot of dictators have after many decades, in that he starts to believe his own propaganda. He convinced himself that the Ukrainians would be a rollover operation, much like Georgia in the past, or even parts of Syria, where the Russian forces met with success after success. Mm-hmm. This has not happened, and this has also exposed the weak part of the Russian military, and that is logistics. Tanks running out of fuel. Everything seemed predicated on a massive blitzkrieg that would decide things in 72 hours. And when that didn't happen, then we have the situation that Russia is in right now. I also think that Putin underestimated Western resolve on this one, particularly as previous speakers have said, the German situation. Germany seems prepared to literally turn on, in less than 48 hours, on a policy that they developed over 15 years of seeking accommodation with Russia. Mm-hmm. That seems to have fallen into pieces now. And I'm sure that's not something that Putin, in his calculation, had thought would occur. So these things are definitely tying up the Russian military, and I'm sure he is furious with his chief of staff and his minister of defense right now. However, the sanctions that are being undertaken, which are very good and far-reaching, will not really have a deterrent effect on him. He seems to have made up his mind to do this, and to hell with the consequences. I think the heightened nuclear alert today actually reveals some weakness on his part. He's trying to rally his people around the possibility of a nuclear war with the United States as another way of trying to address the fact that the Russian population is not behind this move.
Yeah, I'd love to see a real poll of whether or not people believe that Ukraine is full of Nazis and the Ukrainians were going to attack them, or Russia was really under threat from NATO, which is a defense cooperative that it has never shown any sort of offensive moves against Russia. We do have this breaking news banner up that the European Union has now shut airspace to Russian airlines. Talk to us about that and the other moves that we've heard today from Japan and some of the other European countries with respect to the SWIFT banking system. Do you think that what we're seeing on the nuclear saber rattling is a direct response to these economic measures that the Europeans are putting in place?
I think it is. I think I think that the nuclear alert is definitely keeping that in mind. Also, remember, the nuclear alert, I think, is as much for domestic consumption as it is to warn the West. Because, as I said, I think he's trying to revive a flagging effort in Russia with protests, and the fact that I believe the silent majority are absolutely opposed to this war. Many of them have relatives in Ukraine or family ties there. I also think that, of course, the European decision to cut off airspace is very good. Russia has already started threateningly stating that they will do the same to the European Union, and thus flights to Japan and the Far East will be highly disrupted. Mm-hmm. So we have that as well going on.
You know, there's always this talk about how the Russian economy is shaky because it's a one industry economy. It's an energy industry economy, and that Putin, while he's riding his horse with his shirt off, and he tells everybody that he's the big guy, he's got a lot of domestic problems. How long do you think Russian soldiers can continue to get killed in the field before he's forced through domestic pressure, perhaps, to pump the brakes on this? And I've only got about 45 seconds for you.
Right. There's an organization in Russia that is basically Mothers Force Young Soldiers, an organization that was founded during the Afghan war. And it is a very large lobbying group within Russia. And I'm sure they're going to start being very active when perhaps thousands of Russians are going to be going back home in body bags. And so that's another thing that will help undercut Putin's credibility.
All right. Scott Uehlinger, former CIA operations officer. Thank you so much for being with us.